We can talk about Rocky in general first before we dive into some scenes. How would you describe him? What kind of a character is Rocky? Yeah.
Rocky to me seemed like kind of a dude who had a lot of regrets in life.
Yeah, a lot of regret. The first hour of the movie.
It was really depressing, like watching him walk home from the gym and like look at his picture and talk to his turtles, and you're like, dude, this guy's lonely.
There are so many scenes where I kept writing, walks away, sad music.
That's the opposite, though.
Yeah?
Really?
Yeah, because to me, when he leaves the gym, he's in a good mood. He's humming, he's whistling, he's on his way home. He leaves that night it was a win, but he leaves his failures where they lost.
Oh, no, you're thinking of the very first scene.
Yeah.
He's talking about the boxing, like when he goes to see Mick, and Mick basically is like, you thought about retiring?
Oh, well, yeah.
You
I
should.
was talking about when he gets home and he's talking to his
Part of it was that.
Okay.
This was kind of
But to me, it's like he finds the good in everything.
Oh, man, I think he's full of some regret, man. You might be too young.
No,
I think
I agree he's full of regret.
Okay.
Like when he's looking at his picture in the mirror, like he's obviously got regret.
Yeah.
He's also like hopelessly optimistic at the same time.
I might just be more cynical than you.
I think it's kind of like an act he puts on, like when he goes to the pet shop and he's like making jokes with everybody.
Yeah.
I think he's
Well,
just so desperate to talk to somebody. He's
Here,
like,
I agree with desperation. I agree that Rocky is pretty desperate in a lot of ways. But I also think there are moments when he is genuinely happy. For instance, with Adrian, right? As bad as their dialogue is, by the way. And I can only assume it's intentional because somebody at some point was like, yo, man, you got to rewrite. That's bad. Their dialogue is cringeworthy to me. I don't know if you, I mean, it's hard. Like, it makes me uncomfortable watching two people interact that way. I feel bad for them. But I think a lot of the time he's unhappy and maybe even sometimes masking it or trying not to think about it. But when he's with Adrian, I think he seems genuinely happy, right? That's interesting. Because that's not what the movie's really supposed to be about, right? When you think of Rocky, the thing you do not think about is him walking into a pet shop trying to talk to this basically mute woman. You know what I mean? Like, part of the reason, to Rocky's credit, he says so many stupid things to her is like, she's giving him nothing. A whole lot of nothing. But yeah, I would say there, I think he is genuinely happy just to be next to her, right? It's very sweet, actually. Yes?
Well, probably is the fact that, his interactions with her based off of everyone else, she's one of the few, well, she doesn't even much, she's not really judging him on his character.
Yeah.
So just letting him be himself, so that's where he can really, take the weights off of his shoulders,
Yeah.
Every other aspect of his life, everyone's like dogging on him, or got to do whatever.
Yeah.
She's just like, she offers like a safe haven almost.
So many, I agree, so many scenes along with the like walks away sad music, I kept writing no response, no room to respond. And it's in small moments that don't really seem to matter, but they add up. So like, when he has to walk out of the gym when Mick tells him to retire, you notice he talks to him, but then I feel like, Mick doesn't even get the last word. It's that other guy. He's like, I dig your locker, man. And he's just like, great. He has to leave. The driver for the loan shark, that asshole, all that guy is an asshole. That's all he is in the movie. Every time they drop off Rocky, he's like, says something to him, and then he drives away. Like, there's so many moments. When he takes that little girl, walks her home, she goes, screw you, and like, that's he never gets to respond. So much of the movie is, you say, him getting dogged, him getting like beaten down, and not getting to respond, That's interesting. A lot of his life is that. Not just in terms of conversation, but again, you could broaden that a little bit metaphorically and think about, well, there are other ways he doesn't really get to respond. He doesn't really have like power. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that relates a lot to, because throughout the movie, he's always told, like, you got a lucky break. You won that fight tonight by luck. You got the fight against Apollo Creed by luck.
Yeah.
That has a lot to do with, I feel like that has a lot to do with him not being able to respond either. Like, his entire life, he feels it's out of his control.
He did. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would point to powerless. It's interesting to think about his one. Well, are we going to talk about that today? We might talk about. They talk about shots a couple times.
Mhm.
I think we're going to do it today. Let me make sure. Oh yeah, we are. Yeah, and there's this question of whether or not people ever get them. Rocky absolutely gets one in the movie. He gets a big one, right? And even, we won't talk about this scene today. I don't know if you guys caught it. The night before the fight, he can't sleep for obvious reasons. But when he gets back, he tells Adrian, I can't do it. I can't beat him. But he's also saying, like, he's trying to back out. Like, he gets this big shot, and he's too scared to take it, you know? So he obviously does, but that is there's an interesting question in the movie about opportunity. You know, Apollo Creed keeps talking about opportunity. We're not really going to talk about that so much today. We don't have time, but we are absolutely going to talk about America. Apollo Creed, when he comes out, is basically an American flag, right? Like, that is very intentional.
The whole movie is a metaphor.
Yeah, well, but anytime, especially Apollo Creed is in there, man, like, very interesting character that we don't have time to talk about today, but we will talk about him next time. Yeah, okay, good. We actually went away from my question entirely, which is fine. I am still curious. Other than sad, I guess that's where we started. What kind of character is Rocky? Like, who is he in this movie?
Deeply complex, that's for sure.
He's much more complex than he seems, right?
Because on the surface, he just looks like this brutish fighter who spends his days pummeling people, but then you
Yeah.
see him in the alley collecting the money for the loan shark, and he won't take his coat, he won't break his thumbs.
He's generally a good guy.
Yeah.
He's a good guy in like a rough spot.
Yeah.
Would be a way to talk about it,
Yeah.
right? When he gets to that bar, we'll see it. He picks up the guy outside and brings him in. You know,
Yeah.
like, that's a hell of a reaction, but it's a nice thing to do. It's cold out. They're in Philadelphia in, like, I guess the winter. So, like, yeah, he tries to help people, tries to take care of people in the way that he knows how. Is he a hero?
He's kind of like a local hero, kind of like when he's doing his training in the montage, you see like some guy in the background like gives him something.
Like an apple or something.
Yeah, like an apple, and he
Yeah.
takes it, and everybody's like looking at him. They're like, "Hey, it's Rocky."
Yeah. The community's behind him, for
Uh-huh.
sure. Yeah? Yeah, what's up?
Well, I feel like in a sense, he's not really a hero, but more of like an anti-hero, if that makes sense.
Okay.
In the way that like the Punisher is. Because he's not like, you know, the definition of like the best person. Because he, like I said before, he keeps just getting dogged on and
Yeah.
criticized all these times. So it's more so like when he does get these victories, everyone's happy. But when he doesn't, it's like, well, you know, damn, Rocky, what the hell? And, you know, not in the sense that he's the best person ever, but
Yeah.
he's not a bad person in general.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's flawed in the way that I think human beings are. But I guess I'll give you guys the full question. I was curious about your response. And I think this is telling that you say no, and then the description you give. That to me sounds like a hero. What he's not, though, and again, I think this is telling of the times, he's not a superhero. See what I'm saying?
Well, I know in my notes, I kept seeing relations to the story of Hercules,
Okay.
because he's a guy who's forced into a position that he didn't necessarily bring upon himself.
Sure.
But in the end, he redeems himself and becomes this local hero.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I know a little bit about that. It's all about the trials, right? It's all about the
Yeah.
struggle.
Right.
It's not as much about the end result.
Right.
It's about the journey. Yeah.
Well, it's like
Sure.
Hercules with his 7 trials
Yeah.
to prove himself.
Although in the end, I would argue Hercules, I mean, not least of which because he's half god. I would argue we kind of see Hercules as a superhero, right? Like he ends up in the stars for fuck's sake,
Yeah.
or whatever. Rocky loses.
Yeah,
He loses.
I feel like that's debatable though. He does lose, but he loses by a technicality.
I mean,
Well, he
I feel
loses
like
because
he
he was
is
supposed
pretty
to.
done.
He was
No.
supposed to lose.
I
Like he
feel like
wasn't
if it would
supposed
have
to
been
win.
one more round, he would have won. Because he broke his ribs, like he was about to knock
Apollo
out.
messes him up too. Like, my favorite part of the movie, well, one of my favorite parts is when the fight's over, and I'll come to you, Rob, I'm sorry. Just when the fight's over and Apollo Creed, like they're just on each other, they're just leaning on each other, right? They can't stand really. And he says, ain't gonna be no rematch. And he goes, don't want one.
Yeah.
Both of them are like, this is over, this is behind us. By the way, there is a Rocky 2. There actually ends up being a rematch. But in that moment, they're like, look, nah, whoever wins, I don't care. We're not doing this again. They both, even Apollo Creed, who like for most of the movie is more like a superhero figure, I think. He's bigger than life. Like he almost doesn't seem human, right? With what you get to see of him. In the end, even he's made into just a hero. He's just a guy. You know, he's just a human being. Lost train of thought. Yes, ma'am.
Well, like you were asking, like, who is Rocky? Like,
Yes.
what's his character? So this was my first time, like, really seeing this movie.
Sure.
I've never seen it before. But I finished it, and I called my dad, because my dad was like, oh my gosh, you're watching Die Hard, you're watching The Matrix, you're watching Rocky.
Uh-huh.
Oh, you're going to love it, you're going to love
Uh-huh.
it, it's going to be great. And I finished it, and I was like, what was the great part? And he was like, what do you mean, you don't get it? And I was like, you lost. What was supposed to happen? Like, what's all the background? He was like, well, there's a Rocky 2, and there's a Rocky 3, and there's a Rocky 4. And I was like, oh, there is? I thought all that was going to happen in this movie. Like,
Well, it is
I
interesting.
don't get it. Like,
It is interesting. I told my wife, because I mean, it's been a while since I watched it, how much of the other movies we conflate into the first one, like him chasing a chicken. I think that's Rocky 3. Him fighting in the freezer, that's a joke. Like, he doesn't really do that, you know? It's something his buddy puts him up to. Running up the stairs, that's real. But, yeah, like, we almost retcon his origin. I don't know if you guys are familiar. Like, we, over the passage of time, because again, this movie came out in the 70s, so this is kind of old. It's older than me. We kind of look back on it, I think, with some of the expectations we have now about movies like this. I mean, they made Rocky recently. God, was it the 6th one or the 7th? I mean, they made the Creed movies. But you expect him to win. That's how our movies work, right? And again, part of my argument would be, if he somehow, and granted, he works his ass off, and you get the impression in the movie that Apollo Creed isn't taking it super seriously, and maybe doesn't work as hard as he could. Granted all that. But if he walked in there and beat Apollo, he's a superhero. He goes from nobody to beating it. That's a superhero story. That's not human to do that, right? The most he could hope for, and he says as much before the fight, go the distance. Get his ass beat, right? Give some too. I'm not disputing. Give some too, but breaks his nose. Do you guys pick up on that?
Never
Yeah.
has no-
Never broke. That's important. Breaks his nose, right? Like really gets in there and lasts. And that's kind of the most any of us could ask of ourselves, right? To go for it and to last through it, like to struggle through it. Maybe not win. Maybe that's not the most realistic. Like, that's a superhero. But to be a hero, a human being, to me, that's why the ending is important. He wins in some of the later ones. And it's kind of like, it's fun. But when we watch the documentary, then we'll look at some scenes, it's the difference they lay out in First Blood and Rambo 2. First Blood,
This is the normal guy.
Rambo doesn't win. He gets arrested. You know. Rambo 2, he kills half a country. Right? Like it's totally it's a similar kind of thing. Like that line between survival and conquering, I guess. So anyway, it's an interesting thing about the 70s because a lot of movies, I don't know how many 70s movies you guys have seen, but have you ever heard of like Taxi Driver, stuff like that? That movie does not go how you think it's going to go. He does not win. Not a lot of winners in the 70s. It says a little bit about maybe what those people thought about
Yeah, I
themselves.
noticed that in my notes. There's a lot of things going on in the 70s that made people feel like losers.
In a way, yeah. All right. Let's actually look at some of the movie. and I don't know how well this is going to go. Here's Adrian. Let me see. 2007. I worry the timestamps will be a little different on this one. Let's see. You think about retirement. All right. So this is the end of this scene. We're not really looking at the scene. What we are going to look at, he has just left the gym. Mick has just told him to retire. Okay? We're 20 minutes in. He's going to leave from here and go to the pet store. Which again is interesting. You could argue, I mean, we don't know where he was going to go before, but it is interesting. He leaves here and goes to the pet store, right? For reasons that I hope are somewhat obvious, right? He feels bad, he wants to feel good. Where does he feel good? To the pet store, right? But I chose this scene to look at first because I want you thinking about a couple things. Number one, you can talk about movies in the same way you can talk about any text, okay? Most classes you've had, I imagine, I know this is going to turn itself off at some point. I imagine you've looked at books, like a poem or a story or whatever. You can talk about the movie that way. Things people do, things people say. That's still on the table. The other point, though, I want you considering, this is a visual medium, okay? So I also, to the best of your ability, want you thinking about how things are shot. Not all of the time, but sometimes with a good director, things are going to be shot in such a way that they want you focused on something for a particular reason, okay? The thing about it this way, I'm not going to touch anybody, but Daniel, if I'm the director of a movie, you're looking at me right now, but I want you looking over there. I'm going to move your gaze, right? Mm-hmm. All these different cuts in a movie. I'm shifting where you're looking. I'm controlling where you're looking intentionally. Sometimes it's for innocuous reasons, like that person's talking. Other times, maybe there's something else going on, right? So the scene we're about to look at, what they do and what they say, that's always important. But also, just try to be as aware as you can of how the thing is shot. Do you notice anything that you could argue might be intentional, right? There might be something else going on. And we're going to talk about it. Don't forget. All right. So we talk about anything. Again, first day we're looking at a movie. All I'm honestly interested in is you guys generating an inventory. Just anything at all you notice, okay? We're going to hopefully build that muscle a little bit as we go, make you a little more comfortable with doing this. But just anything at all. Yes, ma'am?
The different perspectives that kind of the two were in, and then when it would focus on one or the other to kind of, whenever he was just talking generally, it would just focus only on him, but when he was, speaking to her, you'd either have both of them in the scene to some areas where it would pan back to her, to him, to her. And so, I thought that was really interesting because it continues to show that she's not acknowledging him while he's trying to talk to her and play with the birds. And even when she's at that same cage, it's only showing him unless he's speaking directly to her and asking her something in which she's not responding.
Yeah. So you're saying, if I understand, like you're saying, we're kind of underscoring how much she's just not giving him?
Yes.
Like in terms of, yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that? I'm just curious.
I think it's interesting. Just how, it's hard to explain, but in the sense that, it's not like he's pushing it.
Yeah.
But, she, usually most people would just be like, oh, well, I'm just going to stop. But since he's so persistent with it, she doesn't really seem annoyed.
No, and I should mention this. I don't know if we'll watch this scene, but I did one of my notes in here. I have a ton of notes. Not bragging, but the most awkward kiss you've probably ever seen in a movie. Yeah. Part of my note was explain to them that the 70s had different ideas about consent. It's like, yeah, okay, good. Yeah, I know. Yeah. A lot of us here in 2020 are watching that and be like, what the fuck, dude? What the? Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's cool, but I am saying they were different. Just okay.
It's not in the sense that it's not terrible.
Yeah, but it is important too, and we can't even because we're not watching that scene today, but. It kind of applies here, right? You do get the sense in this scene that she's not telling him to go away. Yeah. And I guess in her way, because she is so, would you say stifled maybe? Like, how would you describe Adrian?
I wanted to
Awkward.
bring this up, because I put
Definitely
it
that.
in my notes.
Yeah.
How greatly contrasting Adrian and Rocky are, because Rocky
Uh-huh.
is like supposed to be depicted as like this just big
Yeah.
the masculine figure,
Yeah.
whatever. But she, like, even in the sense of body language,
Yeah.
she's a lot more closed up.
Well, and how she dresses.
Yeah, she's
right?
just way on the opposite spectrum of just exact femininity. And
Yeah, well, in a way.
Not femininity, but in the sense of like almost daintiness.
Yeah.
Especially for the 70s.
And she's very thin and very,
Yeah.
like, you could break
And
her
just
almost.
quiet and everything, and it's such a great contrast. But I
Yeah.
think it's interesting that you put two of them into the same scenario, because it's it's almost like they're trying to get the yin and yang, where it's like, oh, where he's got these things that she doesn't have, but whatever, and they do well, and that's why it's so hard for me to explain this. I'm sorry, but
You're
that's
good.
why I think the pet shop is his safe haven, because
Okay.
she's, like I said before, she's not going to dog on him. She's just going to kind of sit there and listen.
It's a safe space.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially compared to the other places we see Rocky go,
Mhm.
for sure. And they are, I think, intentionally pretty different in a lot of ways at the beginning of the movie. I also, though, to me, I almost wonder what draws them together too is the fact, for different reasons, the fact that neither one of them gets to respond. I know I keep coming back to that, but I mean, obviously, she doesn't get to respond because she doesn't respond to people. Like, it's just not what she does. But I keep coming back to that word stifled. Like, they're both very sort of like closed in or something. Like, he's closed in with the expectations of maybe the kind of guy he should be, and the opportunities he maybe has or hasn't had. I say that right? Versus she's sort of closed in and stifled by what a woman is supposed to be, right? And maybe she doesn't fit all of those, and she feels like, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And I feel like they relate in that way. Yes, ma'am. Okay. In the movie, the way that other people talk about him, yeah.
But like when they're together, they don't look at each other like
They don't judge each other like that.
Like it's kind of like I can get to you and you won't say anything, and that's
Yeah.
okay. I'm cool with that. You can talk to me, and I won't tell you you're wrong. And I'm cool.
Yeah, well, and I somewhere in my notes, it's like they can be open with each other. Yeah, for sure. And that's the only time they can really do that. I think absolutely, yeah. Cool. Okay. Anything else you guys notice in this scene? There's one thing I got in particular, but I am interested to hear from you guys first.
Talking about the shot from the beginning,
What's that?
like the blurring of him, to me it kind of feels like his struggle between what he should be and what he wants to be.
Describe what you're talking about. I'm just.
So he's told to retire
Uh-huh.
right before. So
Right.
He comes outside, and the next shot you see is from the pet store,
Yeah.
but it's all blurry of him.
Oh, he's kind of out of focus.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's
Yeah.
kind of like his struggle between, maybe I should just retire or should I keep going?
Maybe. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Because, like, I always try to play devil's advocate, right?
Right.
Devil's advocate would say, well, sure, but he's also just out of focus. Do you know what I mean? Like, because they're in the foreground. Maybe. To me, if you were going to argue something like that, I think you would at least have to think about, because you're dealing in a lot of metaphors right now. Metaphorically, what does it mean to be leaving the boxing gym versus what does it mean to be entering the pet store, right? Because they're two very different spaces.
Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, his life before him and Adrian really hit it off, and his life after are two completely different.
Yeah.
They're two completely different people.
Yeah. It's worth thinking about. You'd have to define what those people are, I think. But maybe. Okay. What else do you guys notice? I was so hoping somebody would pick up on my thing, but that's okay. Just anything. Anything at all that struck you as potentially interesting. Because when it comes to the paper, right, I want you doing a scene analysis. I want you to focus on one scene, dig into some details, talk to me about it. This is just like beginning to do that today, right?
He was in there talking to her the whole time, and then
Yeah.
he finally says, "All right, goodbye, Adrian." She's like, "Goodbye, Rocky."
She does say the
That's
one.
the first time she speaks.
Yeah, well, she does say one or two things before that, but they are so soft you may not have heard them. It's like it's under her breath, like it's weird. She is weird at the beginning. Like there's no like something's wrong. Like she is. I keep saying stifled, but she's clearly because you get the sense, I guess, that she's into Rocky, but whatever wall she has up, like she just can't. You know what I mean? All right. I'm going to talk about that. Actually, I happened to phrase it, or pause it, listen to me, at a great spot. The thing I keep noticing when we're talking about how these characters are shot is this.
It looks like she's in the cage.
It always looks like she's in a cage. The one time we are looking at her and we move outside of the cage is when we move and we see Rocky's face in the mirror, but we don't see hers. She's always in a cage in this scene. Like legit, every time she speaks at the very least, there's a couple shots of them from the side, but anytime she's, like we want her opinion, it goes to her and she's in that cage. I mean, that's how it looks, right? Because again, we understand she's, but to me, that feels very intentional, right? Now again, the bigger question is, obviously now we're thinking about she's trapped in some respect. It's hard if we only take the scene on its own, okay? And more on that later, but if you were to talk about this scene in particular, you would almost have to deal with this question of Adrian being trapped. I keep using that word stifled, but somehow like surrounded, like not able to break out in some way. And like, what does that look like? And why do you think that is, right?
Well, you could take note from the scene with her brother, whenever, he's trying to say that he takes care of her, but in reality, she takes care of him.
Paulie is such a piece of shit. Yeah, absolutely. Two things. One, they try to save Paulie in the later movies and make him less of a bastard. He is not very sympathetic in this movie. And it's weird because everyone else like him is super sympathetic. Rocky, Adrian, other people they run into, like the guy he gets that money from when he's working for the loan shark, you're like, man, all these people are just having a real tough time, They're just trying to make it. And you get the sense that Paulie's like that too, but God, he sucks. He just sucks.
Well, I think that's part of the reason Rocky never wants to take him to Gazo.
Yeah.
Because Rocky recognizes
That he
would not be the
Yeah.
person in this job.
Yeah. But it's also the reason he remains his friend, right?
Right.
Like the whole time I'm like, why are these people buddies?
Yeah.
Why is anyone like Paul? He's just a good guy and he wants to take care of them. Like Adrian does.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, Adrian, to look ahead a little bit maybe the next time, Adrian, one of the things, once you get later in the movie, you realize she's trapped by is like these maternal obligations she has to Paulie. Right? Rocky takes care of Paulie, but that's not like Adrian taking care of Paulie. Those are very different things. Rocky gets to go home. Adrian lives with that asshole. And she's basically his mom.
Well, I think in a lot of ways, Adrian is meant to represent females at that time period.
Sure.
Just altogether.
Well, to a degree, and actually there's a bit of a counterpoint in the next scene, so we'll move to that. But I would say yes and no for sure. Like there's absolutely this question of, I think you brought it up to how femininity is represented in the movie. It's in large part Adrian. I mean, she's the female lead, right? I was like, well, what do women look like in Rocky? For half the movie, they're damn near silent, and in cages. Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely intentional. But there is a woman in the next scene, and she's a little different. The next scene, it's right after this. Rocky leaves the pet shop, and this is interesting too. So he gets told to retire. Where does he go? Well, we kind of talked about, he goes to a safe space. Goes to talk to Adrian. They have a conversation. I guess you could call it that, because she does respond a little bit. From here, he goes to the bar. There's a lot going on in this scene. Even watching it, I was like, I should have paused it halfway through. There's a lot. Start wherever you like. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to mention this because I just remembered.
Okay.
You know, how he brought up Hercules and his 7 trials and how the bar is called the Lucky 7 and how Rocky's big thing is all about luck. I do think it's interesting to kind of, well, not his whole thing, but you know.
Yeah.
A lot of like, he's told all the time, it's like, oh, we got lucky. And then, you know, in
Yeah.
the bar, when he has an actual conversation, you know, with this guy, besides people commenting like the girl or, you know, Polly or whatever, because we're pushing that aside, it's all about taking shots and how, you know, he's like, well, I'm good, you're not. How are you gonna criticize me when, I mean, you don't like your life, but I got a business.
Well, it's interesting. So Rocky does that a couple times where he says a thing, and to my memory, the bartender is the only guy who calls him on it. He'll say a thing to somebody else, and you clearly understand he's talking to himself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But the bartender's like, hey man, you're not talking to me. Like,
I think
that's your deal.
shots have a lot to say about that too, because like in the pet store, the previous scene, it shows him talking about creeps, but you see him from the mirror.
Yeah.
He's talking about himself.
He worries.
Yeah.
Why? Time out real quick. Somebody help me with the time, because I have no way to look at it.
It's like 4:17, I think.
It's 4:18.
Okay. I was making sure. Anyway, sorry. Yeah. Why does he worry maybe he's a creep in that scene?
Because he's like telling all these jokes and trying to talk to her.
He keeps
She's
talking to
just
a
not
woman that
saying-
barely says anything to
She's not saying anything back. Doesn't make anybody feel.
One of the definitions of a creep, I think. Yeah. Okay, good. So it's Rocky's. He's more self-aware than we give him credit for, but then there are other moments where he doesn't even maybe realize how self-aware he is. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
He'll constantly point something out to other characters that's really nagging him. And in this moment, he's like, you gotta take a shot. Why don't you take a shot? And the bartender's like, that's you, boss. You're the one that like everybody, you get the sense, kind of makes fun of behind your back type of thing. Right? Yeah, for sure. The question of luck is important. Lucky 7 Tavern is an interesting sign to me. Because it's a dive bar, right? Like you see everybody in there. He literally carries a guy in off the street. Like you get the sense everybody in there is kind of
Down on their luck.
yes, and it's a fun bit of irony to me. The name of that bar, that seems intentional. Like, oh, Lucky 7, then you come in, you're like, that's so far from what this is. Yes.
Oh, I also wanted to mention the contrast between that woman and Adrian.
Exactly.
In the sense that this woman, you know, is the first to engage in conversation. You're like, hey, Rocky.
She talks to Rocky.
She not only talks to him, but she just engages him in the sense of like, what happened to you?
She seems interested.
Yeah, and like maybe even a little worried, and he's like, gotta fight, just completely brushes her
Walks
off.
right past her. Wants
You know,
nothing to do with that woman.
I thought that was so interesting
Yeah.
because even like the color contrast, if you're
Yeah.
going into that depth, Adrian has a lot of, you know, bland grays, browns.
And like I think a
and her-
blue coat. Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
just like a lot of like nothing that stands out. This woman has like, you know, bright blonde hair and
I feel like a fur coat or something.
yeah, I think so. She had like you could see her. You walk
Yeah.
in the bar, she may be
Yeah.
one of the first people you see.
Yeah.
He's just like, I don't want that. Go straight to Polly. Polly, why is your sister liking me?
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting how even in that sense he's self-aware but also not. He's like, why doesn't your sister like me?
Well,
And other women maybe being like, Rocky, what's going on?
that's one way to read that. I am curious. I wanted to ask you guys this. Why do you think? I mean, he brushes that woman off basically, right?
Mhm.
Why do you think that is? Because it sounds like he's been trying to talk to Adrian for a hot minute, getting nowhere. Meanwhile, this other woman who, like, I mean, she looks fine. I don't know. I could probably do worse. She's like, Rocky, talk to me. Tell me your stories. And he's just like, later, bitch. Like, what?
Maybe
yes,
that's-
yes. Oh, here it is.
Well, I mean, he talks to the little girl about like being before and being out in front of all
Yeah.
these dudes. So I think it probably he'd rather chase than be chased.
That's
or
interesting.
like the girls come up to him and like, can we get an autograph? And he's just like, you know.
That's interesting.
The girl who turns his head away from him rather than the one who's always.
She's too available. So much so. It's interesting, and then I'll come to you again. It's interesting. Honestly, I like when you guys say a thing I had not considered. That kind of sometimes blows my mind a little bit. Like, because it's what you're talking about is the next scene, immediately after this. And again, Rocky has a tendency to sort of carry over thoughts from other scenes, is another way to think about it. So, like, one way I like to read the shots conversation, yes, he's thinking about his life and like how he hasn't accomplished much, you know. Maybe he's been too conservative. But it's also right after he was talking to Adrian. And he does ask her out. It's not like he doesn't, but he doesn't really, I mean, it's very, like, I don't even think he looks at her when he said it. It feels like when you were in middle school, when you asked somebody, like, to go see a movie. You know, it felt like that.
You wrote like, "Do you like me?" on note paper.
Yeah. It's, yeah. And is that really taking a shot? No. Here, you can make a similar argument. Again, I had not considered this. He brushes right past that woman who is much more, we'll say, in your face with what she wants, right? And by our current standards, that's pretty okay, generally, right? Like, we're pretty cool with that as a society. But maybe you could start to make the argument in the 70s, maybe not so much. Maybe in terms of femininity, we're not prepared for that. Rocky's not ready to deal with that. And when he encounters it, he's like, nope, I'm taking the silent lady, sorry. Right? Walks right past her. Because in the next scene, when he meets, what's her name? Marie, the 12-year-old chain smoker. When he meets her, he gives her that conversation about people thinking you're a whore. Right? You could make the argument he's thinking about this when he goes to talk to Marie. And again, think about the description he gives her. Well, I guess we'll do it when we get there. Never mind. But that's interesting.
And like Polly feels some kind of way.
Polly,
They
God.
get into an argument about like, are you banging my sister? Like, what's going on?
Well, he talks about that later, but how he talks about her here. His own sister. He says her body's going to dry up. Are we completely clear on what he's talking about? Jesus Christ. Like, dude. And again, you can start, like, on the one hand, we have to admit, and I am still coming to you, sorry.
What she's talking about was more what I was going to talk about, really.
Okay, sweet. Okay. On the one hand, we have to remember Polly sucks. And that is part of it. You can't necessarily say everything a given character says is like how everybody in the 70s must have felt, right? Because not everybody's Polly, right? But Polly says this thing, and Rocky kind of just takes it like it doesn't seem like it's out of nowhere, I guess is what I'm trying to say, right? This idea that this is how you talk about women. Not least of which, this is how you talk about your sister. And again, that tells us a little bit about maybe how we measure women, like the standards women are held to, maybe. I put this another way. This is an honest question. Do you get the sense that Rocky's idea of like the ideal woman is maybe different from Polly's?
That's obvious by the end.
Why do you say that?
Because Polly is into the kind of woman that flaunts herself at the bar. You see that with the hooker, I guess you could call her, that he has at the end.
Easy,
He paid
huh?
200. Well, I mean, he paid for her.
Okay.
He says straight up, I paid $200 for her.
And that's interesting
Yeah.
because he seems proud of it.
Yeah. See, he's into that kind of woman.
Yeah.
He is into the quiet, refined kind of woman.
Well, questions about refined, but quiet for sure. Yes.
Well, I think it all, like, you know, even just physically, they have such different, like, attributes where Polly's
Yeah.
gonna, you know, comb his hair, and, you know, Rocky's got a black eye, and, you know, just
Can-
the different paths that they're going down, I think is really interesting, the fact that they still tend to meet up, and, you know, while Rocky may not inherently disagree with how Polly thinks, you know, outwardly, to be like, no, you're completely wrong, he's like, You know, so I think that's just really interesting, especially since Polly looks like such a gross scumbag.
He does. Yes, ma'am.
I was just saying, like, he gets defensive, like, he got defensive in the bathroom.
Polly does.
No,
Right.
Rocky does.
Okay,
He gets
okay.
defensive when Polly says anything, like, bad about
He
his
does.
sister. He's like, yo, like, cut
He
it out.
likes her. It's cute. Yeah. I mean, for real, like you get the sense that what a guy like Paulie wants out of a woman, whether or not he pays for her, he's all about the body and uses that Paulie might have for that female body.
Yeah.
That's about as scholarly as I can put that. Okay. You get the sense that that's what he's about. Rocky, I mean, you see Adrian at the start of the movie. You can't see Adrian at the start of the movie. she's basically wearing a shawl. Like you can't, that's not what he's interested in when it comes to her, right? He wants something else. And one of the interesting things to me is, at least in 1976, that's super notable. For the main character, for Rocky, to want a woman for the reasons that he seems to want her. That's noteworthy here, for sure. You reminded me real quick, this scene, Paulie is brushing his hair in that broken mirror. Why is Paulie brushing his hair? You see what I'm saying? He has no reason to be doing that. You see him from the back, huge bald spot, his hair is not going anywhere.
I mean, he wants to look nice for the,
I know.
for the bar person.
It could also be the fact that,
But it's a pretense, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's all, there's nothing actually happening. He's doing it to like convince himself. I don't know. Sorry, go
Well, I
ahead.
was gonna jump on that, and I was gonna say, well, probably that, like, Rocky doesn't really care about himself, like, physically, like, he doesn't care about how he really looks in the sense that, you know, he's more focused on, at least in the sense of Adrian,
Yeah.
everything else.
He talks about making up jokes. He's trying to be
Yeah,
creative.
he's trying to just, like, expand himself in that regard, but with Paulie, he's worried about how a woman looks, so he's probably
Yeah.
just gonna focus on his looks
How he
in
looks.
regard of women, so.
Damn,
that's-
imagine that guy trying to get by on his looks. Oof.
But, you know, that could also be it, you know, when they're
Yeah.
talking about women in a general sense, they're taking their attributes that they care about,
Yeah.
and then they're
Measuring them. Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. In that way, it's almost like even Paulie, who's like a pig, is like, you could argue, a little bit of a feminist because he holds himself to similar standards. Maybe? Yeah, I know. Okay. Here's another question. We kind of danced all around this. Why are Paulie and Rocky friends, do you think? Like, why are they friends? All their interactions, like, suck.
It's about Adrian.
We get the sense they were friends long before that, though.
Well, yeah, but I feel like maybe he remains friends with him for two reasons. One, to get closer to Adrian.
Yeah.
And two, because he feels that maybe he can be helpful to Paulie. Maybe help him turn his life around or see.
There is that. One moment is real quick. I just want to point you guys to like crazy fast things you can miss. When he walks into the bathroom, it took me watching the scene a couple times. He walks into the bathroom, he has a bottle of beer. He grabs Paulie's glass and fills it up for him. And puts it, and you see Paulie take a drink. Like, it's super fast. Stuff like that. He buys him the beer, obviously. But it's like, the first thing he does is like, let me hook my guy up, you know. So there is that. I mean, what I'm really asking is like, how did they ever become friends? To be as different as they are.
Probably like childhood friends, and then they just like kind of stayed.
Yeah. They grew up on the same. Yeah. The point I'm starting to get at here is the kinds of people, most of the people we encounter in this movie, at least in Rocky's world, are a part of Rocky's world. You see what I'm saying? They all grew up on that block. They're all poor. To be real. I mean, Rocky's apartment, whoa. I lived in joints like that, and it's not. And even Paulie's is nicer because like Adrian dresses it up or whatever, you know. But it's not awesome. Like you get the sense that everybody in this part of town isn't doing well financially. And as soon as you recognize that, I immediately start thinking about opportunities. And there's something you guys are used to thinking about, like you have fewer opportunities if you come from lesser means. Like we know this, okay? But we don't always consider all of those opportunities you miss. I think one of them might be you got fewer kinds of people to talk to. What if you grew up and the only person next door is Paulie? Fuck. I guess we're friends, right? I would argue, because I'm super cynical. Yes, he takes care of him. Yes, if you want to talk, like maybe it's also, I mean, absolutely Adrian is part of the equation. But you do get the sense that they were like childhood friends probably.
Well, you have to consider that he might not have always been like this.
True.
His adult years that have
True.
turned sour.
And you do get the sense too that they, somewhere in the end, they want to make him more sympathetic of a character. That's really hard because he is so awful. But you could make the claim that they try to have you thinking about the fact that maybe Paulie was shaped this way by his surroundings. For
Well, I
sure.
feel like we all have had those friends that like you didn't see their flaws when you were a kid, and they didn't really come to light until you got
Yeah.
older.
That's, yeah.
Just friends out of convenience. You're just friends because like you don't have anybody else. Like it's either him or the turtles. Like
Well, that's what I'm talking. Yeah. But that's what I'm talking about. Lack of opportunity. It's a weird way to think about it. Like we don't talk about it that way usually. But I'm kind of wondering if you could take that conversation we would obviously have about Rocky when it comes to just having no fucking money. You're like, well, does that affect him in other ways? Like he goes to this dive bar. He's only around people like him, geographically, but also financially. And it's like, well, if that's true, Paulie's one of those people. Like it's just we here and then all the way over there.
Oh, I was saying, Polly looks super old.
He does. He looks rough.
Yeah, like, and Rocky just said he was 30, or 29, 30.
Yeah, yeah.
So, like, is Polly, if they're not the same age?
I think they are.
Oh, okay.
We can talk about that in a second. What'd you have over there?
Oh, I was gonna mention that, while it is like a geographical thing too, and I was gonna mention that, it could also be the fact that, Rocky inadvertently may have some form of a hero complex.
Yeah.
That's that, because I thought, like, when I was watching it, I was like, wow, he's just sticking by Paulie no matter what, like,
Yeah.
in all the movies, and progressively
Yeah.
Paulie does get better, you could
Yeah.
argue because of Rocky, so
Uh.
you, like, throughout the span of
So does he save him? Is that what you're thinking?
in some way, I
Yeah.
mean, if you're making this an entire series,
Yeah.
but even through the beginning, I mean, Rocky brings in this guy, he's just helping people if they need help, and where, I mean, Paulie might just want a drink, he just gives him
Yeah.
something, because when you're surrounded by, these people in, more financially troubled situations or whatever, to
Yeah.
be like the beacon of light, almost, but to also be the one that people beat down on.
Yeah.
What he's doing.
He does have a bit of a hero complex, I'll give you that. Like, the picking the dude up out of the street is a strong move.
Mhm.
I've helped people out in my life. I've never picked up a guy and just brought him in. But it's weird because, like, on the one hand, like, you can make the argument that maybe he's overstepping some boundaries in doing that, right? Like, that's when we talk about a hero complex. It's like somebody who thinks of himself as a hero and conceives of himself that way, and so he acts accordingly. And that's a good thing up until it's not, right? Up until he crossed the line. Now he's an asshole. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. It's interesting. The film definitely allows you to think about that, though. I will give you that. That's interesting. Okay. Is there anything we missed? We talked about a lot. Oh, we didn't even talk about Apollo. We meet Apollo here
Oh.
on TV.
No.
Oh yeah, him.
Well, I had something
Well, no,
I
you're
wanted to
gonna
say
talk
about
about
that.
it later.
What? It's like another day,
You
but
said
it,
you didn't want to talk about.
no. I mean, you talk about anything. What time is it, by the way? I still don't have a clock.
It is 4:36.
So we have no time for another scene, so you were definitely talking about Apollo. We meet him here. Anything interesting about that?
Well, about your whole thing with him being like a superhero. First of all, he doesn't like refer to himself by his real name. He calls himself Apollo Creed. Like refers himself in like
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, even that name though, man.
Uh-huh.
Apollo Creed.
And
Greek
he's, like,
god and like Creed.
He's like smiling. He's like really charismatic.
He is. He's a
He
movie
seems
star.
he seems kind of untouchable in a way.
Yeah, how do we meet him?
In an interview on like the TV.
On TV. And again, I'll come to you real quick, because this might be lost on some of you. 1976, TVs are magic. Like I understand the TV they're watching is a piece of shit, but like, TVs have only existed for a couple of decades at this point. Like, they're still wild. And I guess I could turn this off since it's just gonna sit here. But it's an indicator of what? Him being on TV.
It's like a
What'd you say?
Got money.
He has money? Maybe. At the very least, he has what? Even if he doesn't have money.
Fame, stardom.
Status.
Yes.
Good. Good.
He's landed in New York to be able to be there for this big fight that everyone's talking about.
Yeah.
Another thing that was interesting too was Rocky's comments. You know, I mean, yeah, foreshadowing, whatever.
Uh-huh.
But it's also the fact that he just seemed like, wow, what's up with it? You know, he's kind of like disregarding this guy who has all this fame, which, you know, not really anyone else
is?
is doing. Rocky, you know.
Rocky is?
no. Rocky is admiring.
Well,
his
I
fame.
mean, not, well.
The bartender
I
was
guess
the one who was like,
I meant that. I'm so.
Okay, no, you're good. That's why the pronouns got weird. Yeah, that's what I kind of wanted to talk about. I mean, Apollo says a couple things. He has like slogans. Like, he is very slick, very charismatic. He's in a suit. He's on TV. He is in this scene, part of another world. Okay? He's still that way in other scenes when you actually see him. But the fact that he's on TV, on top of all that, like, he's getting beamed into where Rocky and this bartender are. He's on some other plane of existence from them. You know what I'm saying? And then they're going to comment on it. And yeah, the bartender has a couple things to say. What does he say about it? Rocky doesn't appreciate it, it seems like. Calls him a clown. Calls him another thing I can't say. I don't know if all of you picked up on it. It's real quick. And this is a 1976 film, so the audio is not great. It's a J word. Anyway, it's a little bit racist too. Rocky sidesteps that and goes right to clown. What's their issue? Like, why do you think he calls him a clown, first of all?
Because of the way you act. I mean, he's
Yeah.
your typical TV personality, you know.
Okay.
Performance.
Okay, good. And you find out later, and again, we haven't watched this today, we're talking a lot about Apollo Creed tomorrow. Maybe this is a great segue. Well, you know what I mean, one day. He is a performer. But once we actually see a little more of him, you get the idea that, like, he understands something about performativity, right? Like, what's he in this to do? He's in it for status, he's in it for money, he's in it to do whatever, American dream if you like. And a lot of that seems to come down to, can you be like a character? He absolutely is, for sure. The bartender doesn't seem to appreciate that though, right? It's an interesting question because I guess we're kind of on Rocky's side by default in that conversation. When he defends Apollo Creed, is that fair? I'm asking. No?
I mean, to me,
I mean, it wasn't fault.
It makes
I feel like average, but if you're just watching
I mean, I understand
Yeah.
both sides, but if you're like looking at it from the bartender's perspective, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, they all grew up in this low income stuff, and you have this guy, and he's like, be a lawyer, be a doctor, don't get into sports, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
You know, he's big and famous off the sports, and he's
That's
like,
true.
This is full of crap. I made my own business, albeit however much money you may be making. So we had to work from the ground up, no matter where this Apollo guy came from. His career, he's like, don't go into my career.
To be the point you're making, and I guess you could say, because I'm using my memory, when the bartender says what he says, it's right after that. You could argue it's at least in part due to the character Apollo Creed plays that he doesn't like. That's true. But you could also argue maybe he doesn't appreciate a guy who clearly, again, wherever he came from, now has money, has status, is in this other world, and is kind of literally looking down, because the TV is just like where they are in bars, it's up here. He's looking down at him and saying, you can be a lawyer, you can be a doctor, and they're like, no.
Yeah, because in a way, he kind of patronizes his own fans. The people who look up to him and want to
Yeah.
be in the position he's in, he tells them it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Stay away.
Real quick, what time is it? I know I keep asking.
It is 4:41.
Okay. We will end with this. What's interesting to me, I agree with what you're saying. I actually do. You could argue he's patronizing to those people, but I kind of wonder if we expect him to be. Like, I kind of wonder if guys like Rocky or whoever, they, again, literally are looking up to Apollo Creed, if part of that looking up to him is to be unintentionally shat upon.
Well, he represents masculinity. in
Sure.
its purest form.
Sure.
I mean, he's got the money, he's got the women following him, he's got
Yeah.
the reputation, he's the
Yeah.
world heavyweight champion.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and again, I wonder, but I wonder if part of that relationship, you want to be patronized or something.
Yeah.
In a way, that's an honest question, but it's something worth thinking about. Okay. For next time, we were gonna watch the scene with Marie. I did kind of think we wouldn't have time, so it's all good. I just want you to think about the movie. That's really. There's something we're doing next week. I write the syllabus because I forget things too. We're going to read articles, I think, for Wednesday. They're not too long, but if you want to get a jump on them, you can. You don't have to. We're going to talk about some more scenes. We're going to concentrate on Apollo next time because he's awesome. And that's really all I got. If you guys have questions about what we're doing or you have thoughts, you can always hit me up. But I really wanted to give you the weekend to digest some of this, so that's all I got. All right. Thank you guys.